Today I'm going to show you how to create this procedural mountain and river valley landscape. This is a setup that I've been playing around with for a few months now. I finally got a good result. I wanted to try and create each mountain with a hill and valley pattern that radiates out from the peak. I'll also show you in the second half of the video two textures that I put on this landscape. The first one is kind of a rock and mud type texture. And the second one is an ice and snow texture. And this is what our nodes are going to look like. I'm going to get rid of this cube and bring in a plane with Shift A. I'm going to change the whole middle area to my shader editor, and I'm going to put that material that was on our cube onto our plane for ease of use there. If you hit N, it gets rid of that shelf on the right. I'm going to change the top right to the 3D viewport. I can size this up a little bit just by grabbing the edges here, and I'm going to zoom in and hold down Z and move my mouse up to go into rendered mode. I'm going to change this to the Cycles render engine and change it to experimental and GPU if you have access to it. For experimental, I'm changing it to that because I want to use the adaptive subdivision option in the subdivision surface modifier. So let's add one of those as well. And it's just going to be this checkbox here. Just make sure that's checked and just go to simple for now. That'll be fine. I'm going to come down to the material properties to enable the displacement. And that's just under settings here. You just need to change where it says displacement from bump only to one of these two options here, displacement only or displacement and bump. I'm going to choose displacement and bump. I'm going to change my lighting to an HDRI setup. So I'm just going to zoom out here, select that light and delete it. Then I'm going to select my plane again and go to world properties, this thing right here. And next to color, it's got this yellow circle. Just click that and click environment texture and then open. And navigate to where you've got some HDRIs. I've got some free ones I downloaded from hdrihaven.com. And I'm going to use, where is it? Greenwich Park 1K. We can see the HDRI in the background. I want it to light my scene, but I don't want it to see in the background. So I'm going to come down to ray visibility and just uncheck camera. I'm going to start on the nodes here. And this is going to be mainly about displacement, but I just want to set up a quick texture setup so we can better see how the displacement is reacting with our mesh there. And I'm going to bring in two nodes, just the layer weight and a color ramp. And I'll just put them back to back here. So I'm going to run out of the Fresnel into the factor and out of the color into the base color. I'm going to leave the blend as is, and I'm going to bring the black flag up to 0.25, and the white is going to come down to 0.58. So if we view this principal BSDF, that shortcut, by the way, to view nodes is just Control, Shift, and left click. That's a node wrangler shortcut. So if it's not working, you just need to go to Preferences, Add-ons, type in the word node, and just make sure this box is checked. So when looking at the preview of that principal BSDF, we can orbit around here, and you can see that this plane changes colors. That's because the color is based on the angle that we're looking at it. So as this displaces, it'll be really easy to see an outline of what it's doing. I'm going to bring the roughness up to 1 on this principal BSDF, and I'll just move these nodes upwards for now. And I'll now start on the displacement. I'm going to start by bringing in a gradient texture. I'll just place it here. And if you look at this, it's just a simple gradient going from left to right, from black to white. And I'm going to change it to radial. It's a little tough to see. It's kind of, the origin is down here because it's coming out of the generated as a default. So I'm going to hit Control T while this is highlighted, and it brings up the texture coordinate and mapping node. And I'm just going to change it to object mapping instead. So now we have our origin point in the middle. So my thinking next was I wanted to have, a peak right here in the middle, and then as it goes out and gets less high in altitude, it has these little valleys and hills as well. So I thought I would make that same texture I've done a couple times, where it's a radial pattern with black lines and white lines. Maybe some number. I'm going to do 8 in total. So I'm going to start out with a math node here and just set it to multiply, and we're going to set this to 8. I'll duplicate that and set this to ping pong, and I'll set this at 0.5. And what this is doing is it's going from 0 to 0.5 to 0 to 0.5 to 0 to 0.5, basically as many times as it can. If I was to set this to 1, it would just do it 4 times because, with the same values, going twice the distance can only go at half the times. So Yeah, anyways, I'm going to add one more multiply at the end here, just set to 2. So that instead of going from 0 to 0.5, it's now going from 0 to 1. I'm going to bring in a Voronoi texture, and let's just hook that up to the vector output from that mapping node. And I'm going to look at just a position output here. I'm going to set this at 2D, smooth F1, and I'll leave it on Euclidean there. We'll just set this at 2 for the scale, 0.2 for the smoothness, and we'll leave it on randomness as 1 there. So, there's a way to get this gradient texture that we created to appear at the center of each of our cells here. And to do that, I'm just going to back this off slightly and bring in a vector math node. I'm just going to place it right here and change this to subtract. And this is going to go from position to the bottom here. And let's look at that output. Now we have this radial pattern in the center of each of these cells, just where those seeds are. You can see if I view this subtract node, it kind of makes sense why that works. Basically, this setup of these 4 nodes, the texture coordinate, the mapping, the Voronoi, and the subtract, and the mapping is really not even necessary, but this creates a coordinate system in the center of each of those cells, just at the seed point. I'm going to bring in a displacement node and just place it here, and I'll run the multiply into the height. Then I can run the displacement into the displacement, and that actually looks pretty cool. But I'm going to turn it down to a little lower so you can see a little bit better what's going on. And let's look at our principal PSDF. So we can see the radial pattern there of alternate highs and lows, just kind of a sawtooth pattern for now. So I'm going to do a couple things to refine that to make it look not so jagged, a little bit more like mountains. I'm going to duplicate this multiply and just change it to 0.4. That'll be kind of a controller for the relative strength of this branch of nodes here. What I'd like to tackle next is the center of each cell there where the mountain peaks are. I want those to be a little higher, so I'm going to run this distance output of the Voronoi into a color amp. And I'm going to change the black flag to 0.04, and the white is going to come down to 0.2. Then I'm going to run this into a mix RGB into the factor. It's kind of an exclusion for where I don't want this other spot to be. I'll plug that into the second one, and we can kind of see it's putting a white spot where each peak is. I'm going to plug this mix output into the height there. You can see it pushes it up a little bit. I'm also going to bring in another color amp, place it right here, and this is going to change to 404040 for the hex code. And I'm going to move that up to 0.1. Then I'm going to bring the white down to 0.3. I'm going to change the interpolation type to B-spline. And I'm also going to change the interpolation type of this one to ease. Then I'm going to come over this mix and change it to multiply. And this color 2, instead of BC, 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 I'm going to turn it down a little bit. It's going to be at 6666666, just like that. I'm going to do a similar step here to do with those peaks again. This time I'm going to come out of the subtract node, and I'm going to go into a vector math node. So I'll just place that there, and let's set this to length. So if we view the output, we can see it's got those circles again in the general spot where those seeds are, and these outlines as well. I'm going to feed this into another color ramp, and we'll change the black to 0.02, and the white is going to come down to 0.15. And then we're going to do something similar with another mix RGB. I'll just bring it in, and this color ramp is going to go into the factor again. And this mix mult is going to go into color 2. And then we'll set this hex code as 7C, 7C, 7C. I'm going to turn up the scale a little bit to 0.5 so we can see what's happening a bit better. And now I'll plug this other mix RGB into the height there. We can see it makes a slight difference. Now the peaks are a little bit higher. I'm going to do one more branch to contribute to that effect. I'm going to grab this one color ramp we set to ease down here and just duplicate that with Control-Shift-D so it remains attached to that Voronoi up there. And I'm just going to modify this a little bit here by adding 2 more sliders. So let's spread these out a little bit here. we're going to set all the values. The white is actually going to be at the bottom, and the black is actually going to be at the top at 0.827. So I'm just going to set those up first, and then these other two colors are going to be in the middle. This first gray is going to be at 0.414, and this other gray is going to be at 0.66. So we'll set this first gray at the hex code is going to be 494949. Then the third, or the second gray, the third flag there is going to be 353535. So if we look at this color, we can see kind of a white area in the middle, and then kind of a gradient shift there a couple times. And we're going to do something similar here once again. We're going to bring in a mix RGB, place it right here. This time we're going to feed this into color 2, and this mix RGB just upstream of it is going to go into color 1. And we're going to set this at mix multiply. We're going to set it at 0.9. So it's mostly getting the influence from this branch down here. And then I'm going to run that into the displacement node. So we'll just plug that into the height there. Now we have one more node branch contributing to that effect. On this displacement node, I'm going to fix it a little bit. I'm going to change the mid-level to 0, and I'm going to turn the scale up to 0.9. We can see our mountains really starting to take shape now. The next thing I want to do is tackle these cell boundaries. So to do that, I'm going to grab this Voronoi here and just Control-Shift-D it so it duplicates it while leaving it attached. I'm going to change the type to distance to edge. There's only one output there, and it gives you these cell boundaries. So we're going to feed that into a color ramp. And I'm going to bring the black flag up to 0.027, so pretty low. And I'm going to bring the white way down to 0.05. So we got basically just these thin black lines and white everywhere else. Then I'm going to bring in a math node, and I'm going to place it right after this multiply. And let's change this to multiply here as well. So it's just a regular math node. I'm going to plug this color ramp into the bottom there. Let's see what that's done to our displacement. Just made that part in the middle flat. I'm going to come back here and make a reroute point just by holding Shift and right-clicking and dragging through the node there. And now we can organize this a little bit better. I'm going to come over to this color ramp and just Control-Shift-D it so we duplicate it without, while leaving it attached to that Voronoi there. And we're just going to change these flags. I'm going to change the white so it's at 0.041, and the black is going to be at 0.059. Then I'm going to duplicate this multiply, place it right here, and change it to subtract. And then I'm going to run this color ramp into that bottom one there. So the effect is a little strong. I'm going to just duplicate this multiply, place it here, and let's change this to a much smaller number, maybe 0.05. Will look pretty good. So one last step is I'm just going to distort all this with some noise. I'll just place it right here, right after the texture coordinate, and I'll bring in a mix RGB and place it right here. I'm going to run the object into color 2, and we'll set the scale at 4, the detail at 10, and then we'll set the mix at 0.7. And there we go, we're all done. Let's talk about how we might get some variations. First of all, you could change this multiply here, make the mountains more radially complex, I guess you could say, or less so. If you turn this down, it was at 8 as a default. Another thing you could do that I had some pretty interesting results with is just bring a vector rotate and put it right before the gradient texture. And if you want to, rotate this around, it gives you a kind of an interesting effect. I found at 22.5, which is just basically the halfway point between 45, because of the 8 sides. Because of this here. Basically, you're just getting the, opposite value as if it was at 0. And 45 is the same value that you start with. Another thing you could do is change the value of the Voronoi scale or randomness. But I would recommend hooking them up to value node before you do that. So I'll just put a value node in here, set it to 2, and we'll set both the scales to the same one there. I'll just duplicate this, change it to 1, and that'll be for the randomness. Once you set that up, you can change these and they'll be in sync, so it'll be okay. Yeah, right, that's just 0 to 1. So, there you go. Much more order to your mountains when it's set at 0. You may want to do kind of a max and min value if you set up a node group for that. Something you could do to speed up the time on your renders is swap out some of these color ramps with map range nodes too. But be careful, I wouldn't replace the B-spline or ease because the interpolation is going to be a little bit different with the regular map range node. I spent a few minutes just framing some of these nodes: branch multiplier, river valley separation, peak separation, main radial displacement, noise influence, Voronoi scale, Voronoi randomness, and the texture up here. And I also replaced some of these color ramps with map ranges. Now I'm going to do one more thing, and that is just to create a simple seed value. I'm going to bring in a value node and just bring in a simple math node. And I'll change this to multiply and change the value to 5. I'm going to plug the value into the top slot there, and then just plug this into location. And if we look at this, we can see that if we change this here, it basically just, if we set this to 1, we can see a little easier what's happening. It's basically just moving this along a diagonal axis because we're going both X, Y, and Z. I guess all three. But since this is 2D, Z isn't going to have an effect, so we're really just controlling it along X and Y. If we set this high enough, it gives us a completely different image each time. So this is just a really quick way to set up a seed. If you're doing a larger scene, you may want to modify it a little bit, but this is good enough for me. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Control J, make a frame, and just call this seed value. Let's make this the same color as these other ones as well. There we go. I'm going to set up this mountain texture, and I'm going to do it pretty quickly. So if you're confused, just ask questions. But I'm going to bring two separate XYZ nodes in here. And I'm going to plug normal into the bottom one here, and into the top one, I'm actually going to plug all the way from one of these last nodes here, this subtract. So you can bring it closer if you need to. I'm going to just see if I can plug it in from there. Yeah, there we go. Then I'm going to shift and right click and drag through here just to create a few reroutes so I can better organize this, see what's going on. Do it as much as you need to more accurately see where your nodes are connecting. I'm also going to bring in a noise texture, and I'll just place it right here, and we're going to have object feeding into the vector there. I'm going to move everything over a little bit, just give me a bit more room so I can see what's going on. I'm going to bring in a mix RGB, and this top separate XYZ that's coming from the subtract near the end of our displacement, we're going to use the Z output and feed it into color 1, and then we're going to use the X output of this separate XYZ that's coming from the normal output over here, and we're just going to leave it on 0.5. That's fine, and I'm going to feed these both into a map range node. I'm going to change the from max to 0.43, and then I'm going to grab this mix RTP, place it right here, and feed the map range output into color 2. And actually, we're going to grab the texture, this frame here, the color ramp inside that texture frame. This color output is going to go into color 1 there. We're just going to leave it at 50-50 mix. That's fine. You can move some of this into your frame if you want. It's up to you how you want to organize that. On the output of this mix RGB, I'm going to add in one color ramp, place it there. We'll just move this over. Then I'm going to bring in a map range node, place it here, just attach that up to the value, and duplicate that map range node with Control-Shift-D so it remains attached to that mix RGB. Then this top color range, let's create two more flags. The black we're going to leave at the bottom. The white I'm going to bring down to 0.51. We'll move this flag up a little bit. This flag here we'll set at 0.31, and I'm going to set the hex value there to 89765C. You don't have to do the exact same as me if you want, but that's just what I did. This top flag, I'm going to set it to 0.825, and I'm going to change the hex value to 56472E. So two browns, a white, and a black. In these map range nodes, I'm going to leave the bottom one as is, and for the top one, I'm going to change the from max to 0.35. I'm also going to duplicate this principled BSDF, just place it right here, and I'm going to mix these together with Control Shift and right click and drag. So we get a mix shader going there as well. Why don't we put that inside the border? Make it look a little nicer. This one, yeah, perfect. Inside as well. And this second map range node, we're going to plug into this second one here, into the roughness actually. Let's just do that right now. This top one is going to go into the roughness of that first principled BSDF, and this color ramp here is going to go into the base color right here. And this one, I had it set to white or something close to white. It doesn't really matter as much. I'm going to go back to this noise texture over here. Let's come out of the factor. I'm going to go into a map range node, and we're going to change the from min to 0.6 and the from max to 0.7. So we're kind of crushing the values there, kind of like if a color ramp, we just drag the flags right next to each other. I'm going to bring in a bump node, and we're going to change the, first of all, make sure it's plugged into height. We're going to change the strength to something pretty low, 0.1. Looks pretty good. So I'm going to bring this over here. And let's drag the map range over as well. And we're going to plug this into both of the normal inputs on those principal BSDFs there. I'm going to create a little incision here by holding down Shift and right-clicking and dragging. I'm going to duplicate this map range, the one that's attached to that noise texture. Just if we create that little reroute, it just kind of duplicates from that point, so it's kind of nice. And I'm going to change this from min to 0.1, from max to 0.5, so a little less crushing of the values there, mostly white colors as well. And I'm going to feed this into a math node set to multiply, and the bottom value is actually going to come from this multiply node over here. So I'm just going to rearrange these a little bit, make it easier to look at. That's fine. I'm fine with that. Now we're going to take this multiply here, feed this into one more map range node, and I'll set the values to 0 and 0.01, 0.1. So it's mostly white, a little bit of black. I'm going to plug this into the mixed shader there. And we're not quite done. I actually did two more things that were slightly different here. For instance, this map range that's going to the roughness on the first principal BSDF, I changed the 2 min to just a higher value, so it's more of like a gray. So this just means that it's not going to get quite as smooth and glossy on the mountain texture there. If we go like 0.49, I think that's pretty close to what I had. And for whatever reason, I decided to turn up the transmission on this part right here. I just liked the look of it. So that was the last step there for me. And here is my finished mountain texture. I also added in a water plane. Instead of doing it on this guy here, I just decided to keep it a separate thing. So I'm going to do that really quick as well here. Just bring in a plane, and you can set it to whatever height you want. I'm going to bring it down a little bit. And let's just isolate that for a second. I'm going to create a new material, call it water. Let's find our nodes there. By the way, if you ever can't find your nodes, just hit A a couple times and hit the period button on your bottom right part of your keyboard, and it'll just zoom in on your nodes there. So this is going to be really easy. I'm just going to bring in a texture coordinate, which I just remembered you can't really find it if you start typing texture first. Let's come out of object, and I'm going to go into a noise texture. I'm going to set this to 200, and we're going to go into a bump. And we'll set this at a very low number, 0.02, and I'm going to feed this into the normal. Just make sure that the noise output is into height as well. It's hard to really see. I'm going to turn down the roughness and turn up the transmission to 1. And now we've got our water. I'm going to bring back my mountains there. And you'll notice there's a lot of green. That's mostly coming from this Greenwich Park HDRI that I put in there. In fact, let's get a more neutral color here, just with the sky texture. I'm going to bring down the strength to 0.1. And something like this here, much more neutral. Whatever color you want more of, the HDRI is going to play a huge part in there now that we have some transmissive and reflective materials. But this is my mountain texture. All right, now we're going to take a look at the ice texture. And this is actually set up fairly similarly. So I'm going to do this first part again the same way. Got two separate X, Y, Zs there. And the first one is going to be coming from this subtract here. So I'm just going to try and connect it from here. And this second one is going to be coming from the normal output of that texture coordinate. Then we're going to bring in a mix RGB, place it right here. And the Z is going to go into the top. The X is going to go into the bottom. So the Z from the top one and the X from the bottom one. We'll leave it on mix, and we'll leave it on 50/50. If you want to create some reroute points, that shortcut is Shift and right-click and drag through your node sections there. Just tidy this up a little bit so you can see where these are coming from. Easy readability is important with these guys. There we go. That's good enough. And I'm also going to come out of the object and go into a noise texture, which I will set at 50. and I'll leave everything else the same. And yeah, I'll just bring it up here. I'm going to feed this mix RGB into a map range node, and I'm just going to bring the from max down to 0.43. Make it a little lighter, and that is actually going to mix with this color ramp right here in our texture. And it's up to you how much of these nodes you want to bring into your texture frame. I'm just going to leave it as is. Doesn't really matter too much to me. I'm going to come out of this mix RGB and head into two map range nodes. I'll put the first one down, then I can hit Control Shift D and duplicate it while leaving it attached. And I'm going to unplug this from the base color of this principled BSDF as well. We're just going to leave this as white. So go ahead and set that color to white if that's not what it already is. Let's set up this top map range here. I'm going to set the from min at 0.2 and I'll leave the from max at 1. Then the to min is going to be 0.02 and the to max is going to be 0.004. This is going to go into the subsurface. And then right now that's actually giving us a lot of red. And the reason is inside this subsurface radius option. This is R, G, and B. So right now we got a lot of R, or red. I'm going to set this at 0.1. And let's crank the blue up to 1. Having this subsurface scattering does increase your rendering time. For me, it's about 4 to 5 times as long, but it does also give a pretty cool effect. So if you want to play around with it, I encourage you to do that. But just realize it might impact your render times quite drastically. This second map range, let's set this up. I'm going to leave everything the same except for the from min, which I'm going to set to 0.2. And I'm going to plug this into the roughness. So this is a roughness map here. Less rough, more rough. Let's go back to this noise texture, and I'm just going to come out of the color, although it really doesn't matter that much, and I'm going to go into a map range node. This one here, we're going to set the from min to 0.6, and the from max is going to be 0.7, so we're going to kind of crush the values, a lot more black and white, a lot less in-between values. And this is going to go into a bump node, and that's going to go into the height of the bump node. We'll set this at 0.1. And let's plug this into the normal on this principled BSDF. So I rendered this out. It looks pretty good, but there's just two things I want to change. First of all, it looked a little too shiny here, so I'm going to come to this map range node that's going into the roughness on this principled BSDF. And the to min, I'm going to change that to 0.5. Actually, let's just view that so we can see what I'm doing. So it's kind of black in these areas, but if I bring this up, it's going to be more gray, a lot less rough, a lot less shiny. The other thing as well is there's a lot of noise in the subsurface scattering. If you turn that option on, you usually get a lot of graininess. So turn on some denoising. This box right here next to NLM is a good box to check. That'll solve most of your issues.